Good evening.
Hello. Good evening.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We are on page, we have a whole bunch of people here in the dining room. So again, whoever wants to come, there's a lot of refreshments. And we are on page 205. Is where we left off. We're doing Birchas HaTorah. Oh, here's Bernie. Bernie, are you in New Jersey?
We're doing Simchas Zimra. Oh, we're not starting yet.
Bernie, are you in New Jersey? Or are you in Israel already?
No, I'm home. I did not go.
Go. He left his wife, but he stayed home.
I couldn't go away, get away. That's all.
Temi went though.
Demi went today, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, we're on 205. We're discussing Birchas HaTorah. We're going to discuss reciting a bracha prior to writing, thinking about Torah, or just listening. Somebody gives a shiur. And is that required of Birchas HaTorah? Last time we went into the subject matter of what requires a Birchas HaTorah. Now we're going to learn the sort of the methodology of how you learn. Does that make a difference? Right? We dealt with some halachic issues related to Birchas HaTorah when verbally speaking words of Torah. What is the halacha when it comes to engaging in Torah without verbalizing the words? Must one recite Birchas HaTorah when writing Chidushay Torah or Divrei Torah, or when thinking about Torah, or listening to others speak Divrei Torah, such as listening to a shiur? One of the early rulings on this matter was found in Rav David Avodram. This was an early Rishon who, a lot of dinim of tefillah are in the Avodram. Yes, I'm looking. Correct. That's what we're talking. Here's Yaakov. Here's Yaakov. Okay.
Hi there.
Hi, Yaakov.
Hello.
So we're talking about Birchas HaTorah if you're just maharer in Torah, just thinking about it or listening to a shiur or you're writing Divrei Torah. Do you have to make a Birchas HaTorah? So the Avodram says, V'im hishkim kodem atfila lichtov b'divrei Torah. The person wakes up early. He had insights during his sleep about some new chiddush in Torah. And before he forgets it, he wants to write it down. And he hasn't said Birchas HaTorah yet. Chayav levarak Birchas HaTorah, kamo lilmod. Rak shelo yeh koitev b'divrei harishus. This refers to cases of using a pasuk in a letter or other non-Torah document as an expression rather than as a Torah thought. Like somebody writes in a letter, Ani l'dodi v'dodi li.
So if the sofa has to correct the Torah, is that considered learning the Torah or what?
So that's really good question. So hold on to that. Jerry Einhorn asked, if a sofer is correcting a Sefer Torah, Lahagia, does he have to do a Birchas Torah? So we'll see. We'll see whether that, I think that's going to come up. The Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the Abu Dram, so that a person must recite Birchas Torah before writing Torah content. Or the Shulchan Aruch rules that the same is not true of contemplating Torah, being maharher, thinking about it. That does not need a bracha. Says the Shulchan Aruch and Aruch Chaim Mem Zayin, HaKoitza b'divrei Torah, Afal pi she'eina koirei, tzorech levarech. Based on this, Jerry, Sofer, who's writing a Sefer Torah, would have to make a Birchas Torah, who's writing words of Torah. Hamahar b'divrei Torah ein tzorech levarech. But if you think about it, you think about Torah, you don't have to make a bracha. Says the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Ramah, V'hu adin diyochel livsog din b'lo nesinas tam l'dvarav. Somebody asks a person a shaila in halacha, and he just gives a quick answer, mutter, without going into an explanation that also would not require a birchas Torah. The Yalkut Yosef discusses in some detail the reason why hirhur, contemplation of Torah, does not require a bracha. He explains that the primary mitzvah of Torah study is when you verbalize the words, not simply by thinking about Torah. Says the Yalkut Yosef, Mutter lahara b'divrei Torah afilu kodem shivach birchas Torah. You can think about Torah even though you haven't made the bracha yet. The main mitzvah is when you speak it out. Kimoshe ne'amar, lo yamush sefer Torah zeh mipicha. Right? The sefer Torah can never leave your mouth. V'chein dorshu chazal me'apasuk ki karov elecha davar me'od. Amosai, the Torah is close to you all the time. When? When the words of Torah on your lips. The Nemar, it says in Mishlei, Ki na'im, ki tishmarem bevitnecha, yichavnu yachtav al sfasecha. It's pleasant when you sort of guard the words of Torah in your stomach, but you should have kavana, and you should exude the words through your lips. Means there is life for those that speak out with your lips, with your mouth, the words of Torah. That it's carefully preserved and guarded. Means it's sort of absorbed in the 248 limbs. That you speak it out through your lips. By speaking it out, you can be able to remember it. The Yalkut Yosef explains this is why the Shulchan Aruch didn't establish saying a Birchas Torah when you just think about it. There's no bracha on machshava or hir alev. Several achronim, including the Taz, have difficulty with this ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, who distinguished hearer from ksiva, from writing. Why would one require a bracha in writing and the other would not? Even both are done in silence. When you write, you're also silent, you're not speaking it out. So the Taz, who's the commentary on the Orach Chaim there, he says, I don't know where the Shulchan Aruch got this. He stated that you don't make a bracha on thinking about Torah because you don't speak it. But he did say you make a bracha by writing it. But b'ksiva like elahir, you're not, when you write, you think, you're not speaking. Linatzel mitoch bracha levatala. So what the Taz advises is that when you should make a bracha prior to writing, but you should speak out some of the words. Otherwise, it might be a bracha levatala if you didn't speak out the words. The Mishnah Berurah cites two possible answers to the question raised by the Taz. But he posits that one should not rely on the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch in practice, which means don't rely on not saying a bracha by hearing. A koisef, says the Mishnah Berurah. Svir lei de ksiva adif mehirhur. The Shulchan Aruch obviously is preferring writing to thinking, and therefore requires a bracha for writing. That time, the reason is, well, when you think, there's no maisa. When you write, there's a maisa ksiva, there's an action. Some people, when they're writing, they speak it out naturally. Most of the Achronim do not agree with the Shulchan Aruch that you should make a bracha before writing. Because really you're just thinking about it. So he says in practice, you should not make a bracha when you write. However, the Yalkut Yosef suggests verbalizing the words to avoid the question. Though he notes that one who recites psukim after the Birchas HaTorah has already fulfilled all opinions, meaning in the morning when we daven and we say the Birchas HaTorah, we immediately follow it with Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha. We say 3 psukim, the Birchas Kohanim, and that fulfills our requirement that we learned something after we made the bracha. So there's not going to be a bracha levatala. So if later on we write something, we've already made a bracha and we've already fulfilled it. The Yalkut Yosef points to a few reasons why writing words of Torah is potentially stricter than hirhur. Namely, he performs a maisa, an action, and that other people can study from his writings. He posits that you should make a bracha before writing. You should enunciate some of the words that you're writing to satisfy all the opinions. Because you're doing an action when you write. And it's recognizable that he's learning Torah. He's going to provide source material for other people to learn from. We're not worried that he made a bracha levatal. We all recite the Birchas Kohanim after the Birchas HaTorah in the morning, and therefore we already satisfied the issue of bracha levatal. Rav Ovadia and the Yabia Omer brings the tshuva of the Shev Yaakov, who also brings a distinction between writing and thinking. V'ra'iti b'shuv Shev Yaakov, Shevi Kushis HaTaz v'Mogen Avram. They bring the question of the Taz, the Tiritz, and he answered, the be'emes time of boy, lama mahar b'divrei Torah in tzarech levarech. You have to answer for the Shulchan Aruch why, when you thought about Torah, you did not need a bracha, but when you write it, you need a bracha. Hari al kol ponim oisek b'divrei Torah. Either way, he's being oisek. El mishum shamitzvah sasei shel Talmud Torah nafkilon. We learn the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, midechsi v'shinantem levanecha. You shall teach to your sons. V'limadetem osam es bneichem. Like the Rambam wrote in his Sefer where he elucidates all the Targum mitzvahs. Nimtza sheikra mitzvah b'dibur, because v'dibar tabam should be here. Efshar l'lamid l'banav. If you're thinking about Torah, you can't through telepathy give that over to your child. You can only give it over to your child if you speak to him. So therefore, that's why you don't need to make a bracha by thinking. So according to the Shev Yaakov, the difference between writing and hearer is that the mitzvah to teach Torah must be done verbally. Therefore, contemplation is not included, while writing is included since one can teach others through the printed word. It is worth noting that this answer is indicated by the language of the Torah itself. The Torah relates to writing as the meaning of teaching Torah. And now, write for yourself this song. This is right before Parshas Azinu. And teach it to the children of Israel. Place it in their mouths, in order that the song will be for me as a witness for the children of Israel. According to this, since the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is linked to teaching others, one should specifically recite the bracha upon those means of Torah study in which a person transmits the Torah to others. This applies to speaking and writing, but not to silent contemplation, which a person does only in a solitary manner. This is the insights of Rav Al-Ghazi, who wrote the Hebrew Tzurba. Now, the Gaon of Vilna, the Gra, he has a machlokas with this position, and insists that a person should recite the Birchas HaTorah even before Hirhur.
So right now, when I'm looking, when you're speaking, and I'm looking at the words here, I'm not verbalizing anything. I might verbalize it myself. So what I have to.
No, but you're listening.
When I Vilna, you would make the bracha.
No, we're going to see soon that when you listen to a shiur, it's considered learning.
Bernie, I mean, before you write, you may be organizing your thoughts, and therefore that's part of the process of writing it down. And I would think that, something should be said about that, and maybe possibly say a bracha on that.
Right. So listen to the Gra. Avakol zetzarchiyun, the kan mevarch la mitzvah. What's going on here? He's making a bracha, a birchas ha-mitzvah. V'chilek a mitzvah behirhur? Says the Gra. Is there no mitzvah just thinking about Torah? V'haloi nemar v'higisa bo yomam v'layla. Ritzono lomer b'leiv. That means just thinking about it. Kimosha kosu v'hegyon libi. The kosher can live so din. And certainly if you're thinking about how to paskin a shayla. V'halo lemikra tzarch levarach v'chein kishakor b'torah b'tzibur. You have to recite when you read the Torah publicly. So, like Sai said, the Gra holds that you do make a bracha by hirhur. So we have three opinions. The Shulchan Aruch says there is a distinction between thinking, for which one does not recite the bracha, and writing, for which one would recite the bracha. The Taz said one should refrain from reciting the bracha if he will merely write. So he argues even on writing. He says if you're going to speak out the words when you write, you should make the bracha, right? Unless he's also enunciating some of the words. And the Gra said one should recite a bracha for both writing and contemplation. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't offer definitive ruling. See the continuation.
Well, as far as we say, you recite a bracha for writing or contemplation. That's what he's saying.
The Gra said you have to make a bracha no matter what.
Not when you're doing both of them together. When you
Either
write
one.
and contemplate,
Either one.
Right.
Either one. The Mishnah Berurah later on seems to lean towards the Gra. However, he does write that if one is studying Torah in an analytical fashion, after reciting Birchas HaTorah without speaking, he should try to enunciate some of the words so that there will not be any interruption between his bracha and the verbal learning. He acknowledges, though, that this is unnecessary if one follows the generally accepted custom of reciting the psukim of the Birchas Kohanim after the Birchas HaTorah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the hearer lav kedibur dami. He says hearer is not like dibur. Lefizeh yesh li zor lo'isen al aloimdim be'iyun. Mitochas, the people who learn very deeply from a book, they should enunciate some of the words. Achra bracha. So the way to get around all of this is in the morning when you make the bracha, make sure to recite the Birchas Kohanim afterwards. Then there's no bracha levato. Then you covered yourself no matter what you do.
It's never stressed in davening, you know, like, it's part of Sukkah Zimra, I guess, it is.
You say brachas.
But no, people, you say the original brachas, but you don't say the bracha birkas haTorah. People sometimes skip that. They go right to Shema and that's it.
You should not skip it. You should say
That's very
Al
important.
Natilas. We learned already. Most of us say Al Natilas Yadayim when you come to shul. Remember we talked about that machlokas by Natilas Yadayim. Well, then if you're doing your Natilas Yadayim, you can say Asher Yotzar. You can say Elokai Neshama, and you can say Birchas HaTorah, and then say Birchas Kohanim. That should be done before you listen to the Birchas HaShachar.
Ernie,
Yes.
is this related at all to when sometimes we say Devorim Shebelev Einem Devorim, like by Neder or things like that?
Yeah, well, this has to do with Divrei Torah, that the Mishnah Berurah is saying here that Hirhur in Torah is not the same as Dibur in Torah. Now, what you're talking about is other practical things. If you're Maharer a Neder, it's Lavadova, you got to speak it out. But because there's Motzas Vasechat, there's a special pasuk that you have to, it's Lahafli. You've got to speak out the words of the Neder.
You even have another rule about Mipiyam V'lo Miksovam.
Say it again.
Mipiyam V'lo Miksovam.
Regarding what?
Edus.
Right? The Bezdin has to hear them say. They can't write their testimony because they have to be able to. There has to be a cross-examination of the witnesses.
So deposition would not be the same.
Deposition by writing would not be the same. Correct. So the Yalkut Yosef goes a step further than the Mishnah Berurah and writes that if one reads a sefer without speaking before tefillah, he should ideally recite Birchas HaTorah to comply with the opinions that one is obligated with Hirhur. Meaning, let's say you want to read a sefer before davening. The Yalkut Yosef says to cover the opinions of those, like the Gra, who holds that Hirhur requires a bracha, he says you should make that bracha. Hamayin b'sefer nachon shivarch birchas haTorah tchila. Ki yesh makom loymar sha'in mitoch sefer nechshav kedibur. There's a tzad to say that reading that sefer is like dibur. V'lachein tov shivarch birchas haTorah tchila v'yismoch lehen parshas birchas kohanim. Oh, shebishoshian b'sefer yotzi b'sfosav. Or when he's reading the book, he should speak out some of the words. Based on what we have learned, it would seem at first glance that the question of listening to a shiur or to someone else speaking words of Torah would be subject to the same machlokas between the Shulchan Aruch and the Vilna Gaon. Like Jerry asked, if Jerry just comes here and sits and listens to me give this shiur, the Shulchan Aruch would hold that you would not be required to do the Birchas HaTorah, but the Vilna Gaon would require it because he said hearer alone requires it. However, many poskim argue that listening to words of Torah may be more similar to speaking than to contemplation, similar to the concept of shomea ka'oneh. Let's say you're at somebody's house and the balabos makes kiddush. Well, you have a requirement to make kiddush. You have a chiyuv deraisa. Why don't you say your own kiddush? Because you listen to the balabayas. And there's a principle called shomea ka'oneh. Hearing is like speaking. So they're saying when you listen to a shiur through the principle of shomea ka'oneh, it's as if you're speaking. Where one listens to another is considered as having recited himself and can thereby fulfill the recitation of a bracha. Moreover, one who listens to another speaking words of Torah or to a shiur is visibly engaged in an act of Torah learning, which also may be more similar to the act of verbalizing words of Torah. Indeed, the Yalkut Yosef writes that it is proper to recite Birchas HaTorah prior to listening to a shiur.
Did we learn that before? Did we learn this already?
No.
Because, in other words, I could just listen to Kriya, I could listen to the Shemona Esrei, the Chassan repeats Shemona Esrei. I don't say it myself, I listen to it carefully, and that's it, I fulfill the obligation.
However, by Shemona Esrei, it's different because Shmona Esrei is Rach. Jerry asked me, what about just listening to the Shliach Tzibur saying Shmona Esrei? So the Shliach Tzibur for Shmona Esrei was established for people who cannot speak Hebrew at all. If you can speak Hebrew, really, you're not Yotzei through the Shliach Tzibur. You have a requirement, Rachmi, asking for things, health, parnasa. You have to ask it personally. Not only that, you see that the Moedim, why is the Moedim of the Rabbanon different language than the Moedim that we say? Because when the Shliach Tzibur comes to Moedim, we have to say our own thank you. You can't say thank you through a Shaliach. That's why he says his words. We already said those words. We say our own words. So you see, Jay, you cannot be Yotzei through the Shliach Tzibur but let's say I say Bored Priya Gofen and you say Amen. You can drink the wine and you don't have to say the bracha.
Right.
Through Shomea Ka'ona, you're Yotzei that bracha.
Right.
Okay.
And one more thing, what about Kriya Shema? A lot of times you hear that some shuls, the Chaz will repeat the entire Shema, the entire Krishma. The entire Krishma.
You could be Yotzei.
Yes.
You could be Yotzei through Shliach Tzibur Shomea Ka'ona, but Kriya Shema has a concept of all Malchus Shemayim. When you say Shema, you have to receive the yoke of heaven. That you can't. That part of it you can't do through Shomea Ka'ona. Now, the Yalkut Yosef says, "Hashomeh divrei Torah mechaveiro, or shir mipi talmid chacham." If you hear a shir, nachon shevar tchila birchas haTorah, you should say birchas haTorah. The Yismoch len parshas birchas Kohanim, but you should add the 3 sentences of the birchas Kohanim. Va'achar kach yakshiv v'yishma l'chol hadeos, and listen to the shir. V'gam hashomeh divrei Torah mereshem kol. Let's say you listen to it from a recording on tape. Let's say you hear a shir by a woman or a child who are not subject to the obligation of Torah study. So there you should make your bracha. The students of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal report that he ruled that a person must recite the Birchas HaTorah prior to listening to a shir, according to all opinions. He explains that this is because learning Torah in this manner is the primary form of Talmud Torah. He doesn't say that this is like Shomea Ka'oineh. He says that the inyan of Shomea Ka'oineh inyan is when you have a chiyuv to say something, you could be yotzei through listening. But that's not here. He says listening to a shir is how Talmud Torah is done. One person gives the shir, the other people listen and engage. So therefore that he has no shaila, that it's not through Shomea Ka'oineh. It's through, that's the chefts of Torah that needs a bracha. Rav Shlomo goes beyond the explanation given above for requiring Birchas HaTorah. He agrees to the reasoning of the Shev Yaakov that the primary form of learning Torah is the sharing of words of Torah between people. Accordingly, hearing a shir is a standard form of learning Torah. And consequently, it's possible to recite the Birchas HaTorah for this without any hesitation.
And one more thing.
Of course, as is mentioned in one of the footnotes, if you say the formulation in the Siddur, Yotzel Chaladeus, because you've got all the elements of Birchas HaTorah. You have the Gemara, you have Mishnah and Torah.
Yes, so it's better to recite all of that. You've been Mekayim, there's no bracha levatala, then everything else you learn the rest of the day is covered. Exactly.
Ernie, what about if somebody is listening to a shir in Ivrit and he doesn't understand Ivrit? Does he need to do Birkat HaTorah?
Why would you, if he doesn't understand it? You want to say, it's like a chefza. It's a chefza of mitzvah. Didn't we say something like that? Didn't we something like that last week?
Oh, you're a rabbi, very good.
Oh, he said that if he learns Tanakh, he's
Yeah,
Yotzei, 'cause it's
Mikra.
Kriya.
Mikra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mikra, if he learns Tanakh, he doesn't have to understand it. That's
So,
what he says.
David, we made a distinction. Reading Tanakh, even whether you understand or not, you get it. But Lomdis, you got to understand it in order to have a bracha. Otherwise, it makes no sense. That was brought in one of the earlier shiurim.
Okay.
Now, page 211 is the summary. We'll go back to this after we go through it, and then we'll summarize that page 211. What about Birchas HaTorah if you take a nap during the day? Or like on Tikkun Leil Shavuos, when we stay up all night? The halachic aspect of Birchas HaTorah that we have not addressed relates to the extent of the time frame for which the bracha is effective. If one recites the bracha in the morning, it's effective for the entire day. Even if one has a major hesach hadas, such as is it effective for the entire day? Even if you have a hesach hadas, mental interruption, such as taking a long nap? According to the Rosh and most Rishonim, a substantial sleep constitutes a real interruption, a hefsek, with respect to the continuity and efficacy of the Birchas HaTorah, such that it becomes necessary for a person to recite a new Birchas HaTorah. Says the Tzurba M'Rabanan. Do you have to make a bracha every time you learn? Uman nikra hesach hadas. What's considered hesach hadas? Im hashena she'adam regulation b'tzarayim. Person takes a nap in the afternoon. Olufamim she'adam mashkim harbe v'choizer lishon ma'ad. Or he wakes very early. And then he goes back to sleep. V'choizer lishon im nikra hesach hadas olo. So linyan Birchas HaTorah. Adam haragel lishkav al mitasav b'chol yom v'lishon. Person goes to sleep every night and sleeps. So that's certainly has a chadas. Shinas kava mikriv hefsek. The tzarch levarach Birchas HaTorah b'kumo. And of course, then he has to make a new Birchas HaTorah when he wakes up. Aval haragel is namnei miyushiv. Person takes a nap or even sleeps that way at night. Or like he falls asleep on his elbows. Shinas haroyu v'lo avi hafsek, and it's not a hafsek, and that kind of nap doesn't require a bracha when he wakes up. The Beis Yosef cites a dissenting position of the Ogur, who writes the name of his father, that a person should not recite Birchas HaTorah even after a substantial daytime sleep. Now the Beis Yosef writes that he is surprised that the Ogur accepts this, since no other authorities agree with the position. Nonetheless, he writes that the standard practice is not to repeat the bracha. So this is the Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo commentary on the tour. Kosev Oda Ogur, who was also a Rishon, She'aviv zal hinig shel levarach b'yom, afil achar shinas kva. Person took a long nap, 2-hour nap in the afternoon, he would not make another bracha. Chen ra'oi lasos. And that's a good thing to do. We know that all brachas are rabbinic. This one we know is not that rabbinic. This one is deraisa. But in general, we are normally lenient when it comes to brachas by not repeating them. Number two, if I shake the lulav without a bracha, that doesn't take away my mitzvah of lulav. Ad kam l'shonim. So my Talmud Torah is a mitzvah, even though I didn't make a bracha. Now the Beis Yosef, yesh l'tmua, he says that's a wonder. Oh my God, this is a problem.
You should just say, if you want to say it, and there's no problem with it. What's the problem if you were to say the Birchas HaTorah?
No, because you sometimes.
So what?
No, Jerry, you don't want to make a bracha levatala. Jerry asks, well, so what? Just say the
I
bracha.
slept and now he woke up. It's like a new day.
No, because if you don't need to do it, you made a bracha levatala, and a bracha levatala is a very serious problem because you're invoking the name of Hashem when you don't need to.
Right.
That's why the Ugur said, by bracha, it's better to be makel. Being makel means not to say the bracha.
But it seems that you go to work, right? You go to the office. Then
Yes.
mincha time, you want to learn again. We're not discussing that. We're only talking about sleeping.
Sleep. We see work is not a hesach hadas.
That's
You've
the point.
said this before, because during office hours, you as an accountant are being massive amatan neman. You're being honest in business. You're thinking about Torah law. The doctor is thinking about in Yonei Halacha. The lawyer is thinking. That means our daily work is also occupied in Torah. So it's not hesach hadas. That's the way you could answer that.
But if you're sleeping,
So sleeping came up, that might be a hesach hadas. It seems like the Tzurba M'Rabanan said it is. The Ugur says it's not. And then the Beis Yosef says, Bein la Rosh, Bein Rabbeinu Simcha, Bein la Ram, Shina have a hefsek. It is a velo chazina man de poligalei. There's no one who's arguing. In came hey chiniga av deloy kaman. Who did the father of the Ugur go do like? Bavein yafa kochav. Not only that, so the son wanted to follow his father. Mishum yesh machlokas bedavar. But vanan lashkachon man de poligba. But there's no machlokas. Says the Beis Yosef. Ve'afshar shetama mishum de Rabbeinu tam afilu shinas kol alayla lo avi hefsek. K'mo shechtav b'samach. Rabbeinu Tam holds that sleeping a whole night is not a hefsek either. V'amal pishein halacha kamoso. V'nei shekol haposkim cholkim alav. Hainu b'shinas layla. Ava b'shinas yom yu yesh lochosh l'dvorov. That's at night. Everyone argues with Rabbeinu Tam. But taking a long nap in the daytime, there are a lot of people who agree with Rabbeinu Tam. Then it says, V'chei noagim ha'olam shelo v'ach b'yam afilu achar shinas kva. The minig is that people don't wake up after a nap and say another Birchas Torah. Let's see how the Shulchan Aruch eventually paskin. The Beis Yosef suggests that perhaps the reason for the Ugur supporting the position not to recite a bracha after a day nap is because Rabbeinu Tam, which is in Toys's Brachas 11b, holds that one is only obligated to recite Birchas Torah once a day at Shachris, regardless of one's sleep schedule. It's a 24-hour bracha, period. And you renew it later, the next day, 24 hours later. No matter what you did during that day, you slept, you didn't sleep. And even if one wakes up in the middle of the night to study Torah, that means you slept for 5 hours, from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. According to Rabbeinu Tam, when you woke up at 3 a.m. to learn, you're covered. Although the halacha is not in accordance with his opinion. The Beis Yosef suggests that perhaps we employ the principle of being lenient concerning brachos. In this case, when sleeping in the daytime, where sleeping is not as significant as interruption as sleeping at night. Now, the Shulchan Aruch cites both opinions concerning this issue of Birchas Torah after a daytime nap, and writes that the common practice conforms with the opinion of the Ugur. Shinas kva bayom al mitaso havi hefsek. So the Shulchan Aruch seemed to suggest that the minhag of people was to take a nap and not to make the bracha. Now, even though the Shulchan Aruch said that was the minhag, the Mishnah Berurah noted that a number of achronim favor reciting the bracha when you wake up from a daytime nap. Uvelechem chamudos kosav li nera shamavorach tovalov bracha. That if someone wakes up from a nap, makes another bracha, it's a good thing. V'chein nagu mari levarech, v'chein niskim ma'pri chodosh, eli arabo, shemar berishonim v'achronim, v'kach kosav agra, v'chein hetek achaya adam. After the prima gonim mashma the nu chalis b'chla minegaz shol levarech. So the prima gonim is a heavy hitter. And he says you can rely on this. So in light of the popular reluctance to recite the bracha new after long sleep, more recent poskim have discouraged reciting the formal bracha in favor of a more informal formula. According to Yalkut Yosef, one should ideally contemplate the bracha mentally. Let me ask a question from this side. What What is everybody's minig? My minig was never, I was never taught to make a birchas Torah when you wake up from a nap.
Because what's the
Did
nap?
anybody else have that minig?
What's considered a
Nope.
nap?
See, my minig is the minig of most of us, right?
If you sleep Shabbos afternoon, 4 hours, 5 hours, is that
No,
considered a
you
nap?
sleep 4 or 5 hours.
Is that considered a nap?
Of course.
Or is it a sleep? Is
No,
it
that's a nap.
sleep? Most people.
That's
Well, what, then we have this question regarding Tilas Yadayim. If you take a nap in the afternoon on a Shabbos, right, and more than 30 minutes, whatever it is, you have to do Tilas Yadayim when you wake up?
Yeah, we said that you have to, if after a significant nap, you do have to do a Netilas Yadayim.
I think we're out of Bocha.
Yeah, I'll have to go back to volume 8. We don't make brachas Netilas Yadayim except when we wash for Amotzi, is when you make another. But you do wash, like when we change shoes. We don't make another bracha there. You do the Netilas Yadayim without a bracha.
No, but in the morning you make a bracha and Tilas Yadayim.
The morning, right? So, but you were asking, you take a nap in the afternoon. So you make an Netilas Yadayim, but you don't make a bracha.
Well, so the question is, if we're doing Tilas Yadayim, why are you making Tilas Yadayim? And maybe that's the reason you might have to say Birkas Torah at that point.
In the morning, you say the brachas because there's several reasons why you wash. One has to do with the ruach ra, which is somehow you sleep the whole night.
Yeah, but we said after you touch your shoes, you also have to make the Netilas Yadayim. You don't do it with a bracha again. The bracha in the morning was the bracha that covered it. When you make a bracha for Amotzi, yes, then you make another Netilas Yadayim. It's a different type of Netilas Yadayim. We'll go back and review those. There was a complicated sugya there in Netilas Yadayim, but that's not. I don't think it's related here, Chaim, to the Birchas Torah. So I see that the prevalent minig of all of us, that when we took a nap on Shabbos, we didn't make another bracha when we woke up. But you see, the Mishnah Berurah brought a lot of people who said that Tov Olav bracha. So the Yalkut Yosef says, Hayoshin bayom shinas klami taso. If you take a nap, ein hashina bayom nechsheves lehafsek. It's not considered a hefsek. They should start lebracha shenis birchas haTorah kodem limudo. He says you don't have to make another bracha.
That's what I mentioned.
Afilim hichlif b'kadav, even if he changed his clothes. Go ahead, Jacob.
We mentioned this before. Rabbi Yamkiv Kamenetsky didn't sleep Shabbos afternoon because there's Sofi Bracha, Birchas HaTorah.
Because he was concerned about this. He knows the Mishnah Berurah, and he saw a lot of these major poskim, the Eliyah Rabbah and the Pri Chodosh, who said that if you sleep, you should make a bracha. He didn't want to get involved in Machlokes, so he didn't sleep.
So he gave up Oinek Shabbos.
Okay, but now we understand. Why he did it. Right?
Right.
Now we understand why he did it. Now, in addition to mentioning this suggestion of the Yalkut Yosef, the Piskei Teshuvah suggests 2 more options. Reciting the bracha without the key words Elokeinu melech haolam, which would avoid the problem of a potential bracha levatala, or having in mind during Ma'ariv that the bracha of Avos Olam fulfill its obligation, and then studying Torah for a short time after the tefillah. That means at Ma'ariv, when you say Avos Olam, which is like Ava Rab in the morning, Shava Machshava, that it should be a bracha, that'll cover any learning you do later on. Not to make the bracha after a nap. There's no reason to challenge this minig of having to make a bracha when you wake up. Let's say person starts sleeping, wakes up and learns, even though he's going to learn more. Again, that's not a hefsek. If he does take a long nap, he should think about the Birchas HaTorah. Or Yormi B'Lo Kar Shem U'Malchus, or say without the name of Hashem. Or he says, "V'musamach l'tfilas arvis, yichavin lotzis yidei chovasu b'Birchas Avos Olam, u'miyad b'gmar tefillah yilamid ma'at," and then you have your Birchas HaTorah. What about Tikkun Leil Shavuos. The question of reciting Birchas Torah after sleeping during the day, we see it's a machlokas. Poskim agree that sleeping at night generates the obligation for Birchas Torah. At night, during the day, we said it's a machlokas, but everyone except the Rabbeinu Tam said that if you sleep at night and then you wake up, you need a Birchas Torah. This is the case even if a person wakes in the middle of the night. So if you go to sleep at 10 p.m. and you wake up at 3 a.m. and you want to learn, you have to make a Birchas Torah. Even the Yesh Oimrim, who we said the Rabbeinu Tam, no, it's not the Rabbeinu Tam, it was somebody else, agrees with making that the sleep at night is a hafsek. Rabbeinu Tam disagrees with this. And as long as you doesn't have daybreak, you don't have to make a new Birchas Torah. But the halacha is not like Rabbeinu Tam. So, under normal circumstances, what generates the obligation to recite Birchas Torah at the beginning of the day, although they have been recited the previous day? Is it, as in other Birchas HaMitzvah, that the previous day's continuity of involvement with Torah has been formally discontinued by the hefsek, deep sleep? Or is it that the Birchas Torah are fundamentally daily blessings whose renewed recital is mandated by the beginning of a new day? So this is a chakira. What is being machayev a new Birchas Torah? A new day? Or because there was a hefsek of sleep? This fundamental chakira should influence the halacha not only regarding a new bracha following substantial sleep in the daytime, but also regarding a sleepless night in which the person's involvement with Torah study has not been meaningfully interrupted at all. Does the beginning of a new day require a new bracha simply because it's a new day? So in addressing this, the Mishnah Berurah writes that the basis for the bracha remains indeterminate. Therefore, if someone stays awake throughout the night, instead of reciting his own new bracha in the morning, he should hear the bracha from someone who slept. Which is why the minig Tikkun Leil Shavuos is, we wait until somebody who has slept through the night comes to shul, and we listen to his Birchas Torah and we say Amen. It's based on this Mishnah Berurah. Im hayaner kol halayla, the person was awake a whole night. There are some say that since they hold that sleep is the hefsek, and he didn't sleep, you don't need a new bracha. Just like when you make the bracha on putting the putting on shoes or whatever. Shasali called Sarki, which was the shoe one. You got to do it every day because you put on shoes every day. Same thing with Birchas Torah. And Safek Brachas Lahakel. If the bracha is in doubt whether you should say it or not say it, you shouldn't say it. But it's a good thing that he should hear the Birchas Torah from somebody else. He should be Yotzi you. And then say a few psukim. Now, the Yalkut Yosef rules that it's better for one staying up all night to recite the bracha himself. And the Aruch HaShulchan says the same thing. Haner kol halayla, k'mo shenagu Yisrael kedoshim b'leilei chag haShavuos v'Hoshana Rabbah. People are up all night, Hoshana Rabbah, Shavuos, v'chein b'leilei Tikkun Koros. Tikkun Koros is a night spent in study, undertaken as part of a course of tshuva for a severe sin associated with Koros. This concept is mentioned in the Arizal, and the Chidah has a certain curriculum. Even though he was up all night, you're chayav to make a bracha again. Shekain das maran v'rava poskim. That's the sheet of the Shulchan Aruch. V'chein iskim ha'arizal. V'nim shroach rav kol gdola mekubolim. and the Kabbalists follow. Sfardim do that. If it's a minig already, we don't say Sofek Brachos Lahakil. You don't have to get somebody to come in who slept and answer Amen. Better is to do the mitzvah yourself. Says Rabbi Kiva Eger, person was awake a whole day, was awake at night. He makes a bracha in the morning because no matter what, the Rabbeinu Tam, right? Because Rabbeinu Tam says you get the bracha for 24 hours. So sleep is certainly Esach Chadas at night, because the Rosh said sleep in the daytime is Esach Chadas. Al Kolpanim b'yoshin bayom, person, let's say, sleeps in the day. V'neir kol halayla shlach. Well, b'vada yesh levarch midin mimanav shach hanal. Same manav shach. Either way, you should make the bracha.
So really, with Birkas Torah, it's not on the individual. It's a set prayer that you have to say every day. Simple, and that's it. Whether you slept or didn't sleep, we don't care. Every day you have to say Birkas Torah.
So that's the way the Shulchan Aruch learned.
Right.
But the Mishnah Berurah learned that since there are people who hold not so, that if a person it's sleep that defines it, not the next day. So if a person didn't sleep, there's no reason for him to say the bracha. And by saying the bracha, you're being mavatal, you're being saying the name of Hashem levatala. That's what's going on here. So he says, in order to be pater from one of these brothers, got to learn right away. Kriya Shema, not according to everybody, is Torah. Okay. However, the Mishnah Berurah adopts the position of Rabbi Hager. If a person slept during the daytime, and he was up the whole night, everybody holds you have to recite Birchas HaTorah in the morning. The Pischei Tshuva cautions that someone who has remained awake throughout the night must interrupt his study at dawn, though he notes that some poskim hold this is unnecessary. Someone who's learning all night, he should stop learning with alois. From that moment, there's a chiv Birchas HaTorah. You could do the latest one, which is 72 minutes before Nates. Some say he can continue learning until he finishes the subject. Let's conclude with a Dvar Machshava. Well, maybe we'll learn a little Psukei de Zimra. Toisus and Brachas wonders how the Birchas HaTorah can be effective for all Torah study undertaken during the day. This is Yaakov Goldfinger's question. When numerous interruptions take place in the middle, like you work, Tosfos explains that one's mind is always on Torah study to some extent, since the obligation to learn remains for the entire day, even when one is unable to do so in practice. Aval Birchas Asher B'Chorban Birchas Lasuk B'Divrei Torah, Shein Ikar Birchas HaTorah Poteres Kol Hayoim, She'eino Miyash Daito to Kol Shah Adam Mechuyev Lilmod. Person really has to learn every minute. D'Ksiv V'Gita B'Yom V'Layla. V'Zeu K'mo Yoshev Kol Hayom B'Lo Hefsek. Now, Rav Soloveitchik explains this idea in The Love of Torah. Torah is not just an intellectual pastime. Talmud Torah should be an emotional experience as well. One should feel a tremor when engaged in it. The Torah should be seen not just as a book, but as a living personality, like the Shabbos Malka, with whom one can establish an I-thou relationship. I-thou references Martin Buber, who was a colleague of Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik in Berlin. Martin Buber eventually became professor of philosophy at the Hebrew University. Martin Buber's famous writing is I and Thou. Martin Buber said that your relationships in general should not be an I-it relationship. For example, this glass of water, its utility. I have a relationship with it because I use it to help me drink a water. But if I have a friend, that relationship should not be an I-it relationship. A utility relationship should be I-thou. What's I-thou? The closest I-thou relationship is your wife. I-thou. That whatever you want for her, whatever you want for yourself, you want for them. That, according to Martin Buber, is supposed to teach us how to relate with Hashem. The whole purpose of marriage and dveikus with our wives is to lead us to how that's how we're supposed to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu the same way. Now, Rav Soloveitchik took the I-thou relationship.
He was not a Shomer Mitzvahs, right?
It's debatable. It's debatable.
They kept Shabbos.
Martin Buber also wrote all the tales of Hasidim. All of the Hasidic folklore was explored by Martin Buber and brought to the world.
Sholem Aleichem also wrote.
Was he a Shomer Mitzvahs?
No.
I don't know either. I don't know. But I'm just giving a little history. Martin Buber was a fierce Zionist. Fierce. There were many, for example, he argued with Hermann Cohen. Hermann Cohen was the professor of philosophy in Germany. Yosef Ber Soloveitchik got his PhD in philosophy on writing about some of the thoughts of Hermann Cohen. Hermann Cohen and many Germans like him said, what about Israel? We're going to stay here in Germany and we're going to create kultur. And there was a whole philosophy. Martin Buber absolutely would not have it. There were major debates between Martin Buber and the non-Zionists or the anti-Zionists in the secular world. And eventually Martin Buber moved and was the professor of philosophy at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In the time when Albert Einstein, 1920, laid the cornerstone at the Hebrew University, and Rav Kook went to that cornerstone laying. But anyways, by the way, Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik was a major philosopher, wrote a PhD in philosophy, so he was aware of all of these philosophies in Berlin, Martin Heidegger, the being in time, and he commented on all of them and rejected all of them. And I'm not sure he had anything to do with Martin Buber's I-thou, but he might have. Because you notice how he uses this. He can establish an I-thou relationship. If I look at the Talmud as simply paper and print, as merely text, I would never be creative. Torah is a friend. When you apprehend the Torah as a personality, not just a book, it infiltrates your emotional as well as your intellectual life. This is the reason why we say, Lasok b'divrei Torah. Lasok implies that even when we are mentally involved with something else, we are aware of Torah. This awareness of Torah should become part of our I awareness. Just as I am always aware of my existence, without having to walk around saying, I exist, so should I be aware of Torah. Apparently, there are two kinds of awareness according to Tosfos. The first is an acute awareness. Clearly, this is lacking when one thinks about other matters. The second is latent awareness, and this awareness is still present even though one is engaged in other matters. When a mother plays with her child, there's an acute awareness of the child. But when the mother works at a job or is distracted by some other activity, there is a natural latent awareness of her child's existence. She's always thinking about the child. This latent awareness remains throughout their entire lifetime, can never be extinguished. It's expressed in commitment, devotion, a feeling of identification, a feeling that I and the baby are one. The infant is the center of gravity of the parents' lives. They feel they cannot live without their child. The same is true with regards to Torah. There may not be an acute awareness of Torah for 24 hours each day, but the latent awareness never ceases. No matter how much involved one is in other matters, there should always be an awareness of the appreciation of Torah as the highest value. May we all merit to achieve the highest level of latent awareness of Torah, of which Rav Soloveitchik speaks, during all parts of our day, both those we are engaged in Torah study and those when we are not. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And next week, we'll start with Hilchos Psukim Zimra. Does anybody